Welcome to MF Garza Law Firm, helping injured victims one Texan at a time.
Hello and welcome to MF Garza Law Firm, helping injured victims one Texan at a time with Miguel F. Garza, founder of the MF Garza Law Firm. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we are going to talk about something very important and very interesting, unseen but devastating injuries, the silent impact of spinal and brain injuries after an accident. Miguel, welcome back.
Hey, good to see you. Thanks. Good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. We're going to talk about obviously some pretty serious stuff here. So when it comes to motor vehicle accidents, spinal, brain injuries obviously can have lifelong impacts. Can you walk us through the significance of these types of injuries as you've seen them throughout your career and why they're particularly challenging in a personal injury case?
Sure. Yeah, it's a big question there, and some of these injuries that we see are very traumatic, and the biggest ones that most people suffer and in any type of motor vehicle collision is either spine injury or brain injury. And essentially spine injuries affect the spinal cord, potentially causing paralysis or some type of loss of sensation below the area in issue, while brain injuries really impact obviously the brains itself, any cognitive functions, perhaps physical or emotional impairments. And one thing that really kind of separates the two is that brain injuries, it's very, very difficult to see, so to speak, on MRI or some type of diagnostic imaging when compared to a spinal injury. That's why there's a lot of cognitive exercises, a lot of emotional impairments that come with a traumatic brain injury, even a very minor traumatic brain injury. But they can be very different and have different effects. But essentially, both of them affect you neurologically in some way, whether it's having radiating pain down into your shoulders or into your lower extremities, or just simply being, sensitive to light, or not being able to, really put together your thoughts and just really lacking cognitive function like you used to have, mental sharpness, things like that. So they can really differ, but they're both very, very significant and can cause, lifelong debilitating issues.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, and as I feel like we're getting more and more, there's more understanding about head injuries. I feel like, at least to some degree, sports have helped that, along the way. What are, you mentioned a few of them. Are there other red flags that you think people should consider? Like if they've been in an accident, but they think they're okay, but then there's something happening. Like what kind of red flags have you seen?
Certainly, if you have tingling, numbness, or pain that's originally started, let's say, in your neck and now is shooting down to your hand, perhaps you're having numbness in your hand, or a sensation that was not there. Typically, with a spinal cord injury like that, that means there's some type of nerve root impingement. You got 24 vertebrae in your spine, so you have 24 discs in your spine. And best way I can describe it with a spinal injury that some orthopedic specialists that I've deposed have said is that think of a disc like a jelly donut, right? So a jelly donut gets hit and gets whiplash from an accident. And so when that happens, it puts pressure on the donut and jelly starts to come out of that donut. And so that jelly basically impinges on a nerve most of the time, if it's significant enough herniations. And it starts impinging on a nerve, and that impingement shoots down into your extremities. Okay. So that's why they typically suggest maybe spinal cord stimulations, spinal cord injections. Also, another one that's called an ablation, which they basically cauterize the nerve root endings. And, steroids can help, and it's not for everybody. That's what the injection is for. It's a steroid injection, but it helps prevent the area around the nerve and the herniation from becoming more inflamed. So hopefully with those injections, it helps bring the jelly back into the donut, so to speak. And that's one effective way to help treat herniations or disc bulges. With TBIs, obviously it's a lot more difficult because, you just don't want to operate on a brain like you can on a spine or on a disc or any other. It's much more challenging, of course, and you have a lot more subsets of specialties like a neurologist, You got psychotherapists that'll help analyze these types of injuries, how this person was perhaps before the accident compared to after. But, with brain injuries, really the people that can tell the story about how a TBI or a traumatic brain injury has affected somebody is through family and friends.
Mhm.
Was this person able to cognitively and appropriately address this particular situation as opposed to now? Had their mannerisms changed? Has their demeanor changed? All things like that really come into the TBI and brain injuries that are much more difficult to diagnose and to treat when compared to a much more objective injury like a herniated disc or some type of spine injury.
Hmm. Yeah, and I gotta believe. I mean, I guess with spinal injuries might be better, but there's probably some pretty unique challenges that come with litigating these types of injuries.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's 100%. And when it comes to doing that, obviously we want to try to get the client into a experienced physician that knows what they're doing. If somebody lives unfortunately like in a more rural county, it's going to be difficult to get the medical care that they really need.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, sometimes a lot of traveling might be involved there. But one thing that I typically tell clients is that at the end of your case, I'm going to hopefully provide peace of mind to you that you've gotten all the medical care that you needed, that you've seen all the right specialists. So, if you are going to have any future lingering injuries. And that's definitely more common with brain injuries as opposed to spinal injuries. As we all get older, obviously our our body breaks down, whether it's your getting arthritis or developing, dementia in the future, and it's very hard to diagnose more of a brain injury nowadays. But there is a lot of technology that's coming out there that's very, very effective. And we've have much more access to, data and establishing the type of injuries somebody may suffer from a brain injury nowadays than we used to have. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah. And like I said, different forms of treatment, physical therapy, obviously for spine injuries, and injections, like I said, or ablations, as I said, or possibly surgery. With TBIs, like I said, you want to maybe see a psychotherapist or somebody that can help you with your cognitive abilities. Because sometimes they may start off mild, but they can definitely get more moderate or even severe in the future. So, really just depends on the severity of it and getting you diagnosed from a very early set point of when that accident occurred, as opposed to months or years down the road.
How crucial is that testimony from expert witnesses such as neurologists or orthopedic surgeons when dealing with these kind of cases?
It's very important, and it can be very crucial. I won't say that it'll necessarily make or break a case, but it's definitely a big factor, because when you have somebody that's experienced, like a neurologist that has literally done surgery on brains, then obviously they're going to provide compelling testimony. But in my experience, and I've done a lot of focus groups where we present a case to a focus group before we go to trial and get their opinions on what they believe and what they do not believe, or what they may have had difficulty understanding. And we try to have the doctors speak in layman's terms, but sometimes that can be difficult to really, get that point across to just the average person. Even me, I have problems understanding some things that physicians say, just like
Sure.
some people might have difficulty understanding what a lawyer is trying to say. So, really having a family member or a friend that has lived or has known the person for an extended amount of time, that can establish what type of differences this person has had. Have they lost motor functions? Have they lost the ability to perform certain actions? Are they scared or hesitant to do certain actions because of their injury now that they didn't used to have before the wreck? It's very, very challenging. So, I really think that friends and family can provide very, very compelling evidence when it comes to a TBI, because they're the ones that have seen the big difference.
Yeah.
But a physician obviously can render an appropriate diagnosis and help you get the medical treatment you need, and whatever medical care you need from that point on until as long as you may need it.
I mentioned the sports thing. I'm a big football fan, and I've seen stuff where former players, current players, families, their wives, their kids, like say, like they just don't even recognize their dad anymore or their husband anymore, because it's just they're not the same person as they were when they were married. So like, yeah, I can see those testimonies being pretty compelling in court.
Absolutely. Yeah. And some of the things that you can't see, like I said, all this is based on usually objective evidence. That's what the doctor wants to find to help provide an accurate diagnosis. And so, objective evidence is like seeing a broken bone, seeing a herniation or a bulge disc in an MRI, seeing that impingement on the nerve root. That can be all objective evidence to an MRI. With the brain, obviously you can't get access to certain parts of the brain as you could with a spinal cord MRI. And so, like, just an example is like Aaron Hernandez. His family donated his body to be studied after he unfortunately passed away. And because of that, they were able to find out that his brain had actually decreased in size from all the impacts and all the hits that he had during his tenure as a football player, and what other incidents he may have had that sustained some type of TBI that he may not have even known about. Yeah. So very important to try to get that addressed early on, because it will just progressively get worse in the future.
You mentioned long-term effects before. How does the litigation process help ensure that victims receive compensation that covers not just obviously immediate medical costs, which are important too, but the future care and maybe even lost earnings?
Sure. So the important thing regarding making sure you're compensated for future medical care is potentially hiring experts. I prefer to have my clients' treating physicians testify, but one particular expert that I may hire when it comes to lifelong injuries is what's called a life care planner, who can also be a physician. And it's kind of self-explanatory that particular physician creates a life care plan for the remainder of the life expectancy for that particular person. They review all the medical records, all the testimony, all the relevant documents, and provide a life care plan for that particular individual. And having that person testify at trial will definitely be very more compelling than just reading a report. Like a claims adjuster would do. You want to see if these experts can testify well. That you want to make sure that they're obviously very qualified and are knowledgeable in their specialty. And that's one thing that you really want to focus on when helping to develop the future medical care that somebody needs. One thing I also tell people is don't be in a rush to try to settle the case. A lot of people, develop trauma from these wrecks, and they just want to put the whole experience behind them.
Understandably, yeah.
Yeah, and I can't blame them for that. And that's where I try to come in and, sometimes I feel like a therapist as opposed to a lawyer, but I got to tell my clients, what to expect during that process. And you're trying to settle too early on without fully developing your damage model and knowing what issues you may have in the future. You may feel, this perfect example, you may do the medical treatment you need, you may do physical therapy or, get injections, whatever the case may be. And summertime or spring comes around and it's warm. So, you feel more active, your body's loose, you're able to do more things and be more physically active. And then it starts getting cold. And all of a sudden these pains and these aches start coming back. And all of a sudden you're like, well, man, maybe I really am still injured. And maybe I do have some issues that I need to continue receiving medical care for. And that happens all the time, especially, to an elderly person or somebody, in their 50s or above. It's getting old is difficult in general. So having some sort of injury can obviously take a lot longer to heal, and you don't want to rush the process. You just got to kind of trust the process, so to speak. And, that's what having an experienced lawyer and having experienced physicians on your side is very important to your case.
Yeah, there's a reason that so many elderly people retire in Florida, right? In Arizona. It's a reason for that.
That's a good point right there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's got to be difficult to put a price on long-term neurological and physical effects. When you're representing clients with spinal or brain injuries, how do you approach the challenge of quantifying the pain and suffering of the injuries cause?
Very good question. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. But in my opinion, it, I mean, first off, it's like, can they still work? Can they still function?
Yeah.
Um, and the other, probably most important part is, can they still support their family? Can they still be a parent and do what they need to do to help support their children? And that's one of the most difficult things to do. And that's why these cases, obviously sometimes take years. And that's how you really see, like, all right, what type of development are you going to have in the future? What medical care you need? And, how is this person going to be able to do that? So one of the ways we do that, as I said earlier, is through friends and family, or perhaps coworkers, to help establish, how this person has changed since the wreck. And then obviously having experts like physicians, life care planners, neurologists, that really help establish that how this person has changed and what can be expected to change further in the future.
If you're early on and you have an accident and you settle the case, or you accept a settlement, but later you start having severe issues, is there any recourse there? Or once you settle, are you pretty much, as you said in the previous episode, SOL?
Yeah, that's a very difficult thing. And that's probably one of the hardest things to explain to potential clients, or
Yeah.
even people that are not seeking legal advice, but just, simply offering an opinion. If you don't, do all the proper medical care from the start, and then obviously that can affect you in the future. But like you said, these insurance companies, they're going to offer you money right off the bat. They may not have even investigated the wreck. They don't know the severity of your injuries. They haven't even looked at any records. And again, they want you to sign a document acknowledging that in exchange for X amount of dollars, you are no longer pursuing a claim related to this incident. So that's why I always tell clients that try not to rush this. I know you may want to put this behind you, but we don't know the severity of it yet. So we need to see how this develops. Let's see what your doctors say. Let's see how you feel, and don't be in such a rush to try to settle it. I understand sometimes we all need money. We all need to support our families and make a living. But just because they offer you some money here doesn't mean you can't get more money here with a lawsuit, or waiting and being a little bit more patient. But again, it's depending on the person's scenario and their situation. It will do the best that we can and comply with their wishes.
Do you feel like everybody should visit the doctor after an accident, even if they think they're okay?
Absolutely, yeah. At
Yeah.
least get checked out, because
Mhm.
some people initially after a wreck, the adrenaline's pumping. You may not
Absolutely.
feel the injuries or the soreness you may have at the time, unless it's a very traumatic wreck or severe wreck, like broken bones or severed limbs, just to not to get too extreme. But
Right.
definitely get checked out, because the insurance companies, like I said, if you don't go to a medical practitioner within 24 to 48 hours after a wreck, they're just simply going to say, well, you must not be that injured. You didn't seek medical attention in a timely fashion. That
Mhm.
is one of the
Mhm.
defense tactic 101s that any insurance company is going to tell you. Now, you don't necessarily have to go to a full-blown emergency room, but at least go to like an urgent care clinic or an emergency clinic to get checked out, or your primary care physician, if they can see you in a timely fashion.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I mean, we've all either played sports or done something athletic where your adrenaline's pumping and all that, and the next day you wake up and you're like, "Oh, what did I do to my ankle?" I mean, it just happens. It's just when your blood's pumping, you just don't feel it the same.
Yeah, and people don't start really feeling the injuries, like the soreness and the inflammation from a wreck, until 2 to 3 or even a week. Excuse me, 2 to 3 days later, or even a week later.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, it's you want to be as patient as possible. But again, get checked out as soon as possible. Hopefully within 24 hours would be my suggestion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, important stuff and great advice. Thank you for that. And thank you for tuning in to MF Garza Law Firm, helping injured victims one Texan at a time with Miguel F. Garza. To connect with Miguel and his team, head to mfgarzalaw.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. We love having you be part of our community here. Miguel, really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much for the insight on a very serious topic.
Thanks, sir. I appreciate it. You have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.